Hello there, and welcome to this session where we're going to look at models and prototypes. Now, this is going to be an introduction session first of all, because later we'll have a look at some specific models in more detail, because there are different types of models in the way that we use them. One is modeling from a point of view of presenting the solution as we build it, along with prototypes, and the other type of modeling is around business analysis, which we use to get the business understanding of where we are right now and where we need to go to, and therefore fill in the different questions. The 6 questions around the 6 W's actually: the who, what, why, when, what, and how, and by when. So all these things are part of that type of modeling. The model we're going to look at, first of all, here are the models themselves, how we build the picture. Now, some overlap into the other areas as well, like story mapping, for instance, and wireframes. They can be used in 2 different ways. So we're going to look at the modeling here from a point of view of understanding the solution. And we can use models right earlier on to understand what that solution is and test that part of understanding right from the word go. So as soon as we kick the project off, I mean, sometimes even do models, like architects will do models way before that, as we look at the strategic fit of the solution as well through projects and programs. We can do it there as well. So we can test the understanding. So right at the very beginning, we can use models, right? Models to test understanding of the solution. Remember what models? They're touchy-feely things, right? Touchy feelings, cardboard cutouts, matchstick men, doesn't matter. You know, like architects have their matchstick boxes and sort of buildings. Very basic at the very beginning, right? Remember, this is always the idea, to show an overview of the solution right now as it might be, as we seem or deem to see it at the end, the vision that we have in place. It's not always possible to have all models as touchy-feely systems. Sometimes websites, they can have a look at the overall schematic of the layout, for instance. That's what we use wireframes for quite often, to help us do that. We've just got a couple of JPEGs, images hanging off them. So models test the understanding from the start, right? So when everybody says, well, how can we test it? Well, we haven't got a solution to test, but we can test the understanding of what this solution might be. And then we can use prototypes to represent different types that we might have in here. So prototypes might represent the different types of solution if we've got different variations of what we might want to have a look at, to give a view of how we might start to build this. And these prototypes might actually turn out to be the real thing in the end. Okay, so I'll have a look at those as well. Remember, as we go through the solution through the next stage, when we start planning the project through design, or what you want to call it, initiating, foundations, whatever it is you call that particular area, when we're doing the planning, then we start to look at more detail of the model stroke prototypes. And remember, at this point, during that phase, that particular process, whatever you name it, is when we are deciding what we're going to do from this moment onwards. But remember, it's always about at that moment in time. This is how we see the solution at this point in time, and that's what we're going to work to for the moment. Right? It just enables us to baseline, control it from there onwards, so if there are any changes, we know we've got signed off changes, and we know where we were before, in case we need to ever go back to it. And that also works right down at the build level too. So we build models and prototypes as we go through, and these will develop, right? Develop as the solution develops. As solution develops in increments, or through, as solution develops, as we development through the solution itself, through the build of the particular requirement or group of requirements that look like the solution we might want to have in place. So at the same time, we can also use the models at that level to show this is what we expect to get out of this particular time frame, time boxes, work packages, whatever it happens to be, or that particular stage increment, that bigger time frame at the end of that particular build. So we can look and test the understanding from a technical point of view, as well as from the builder's point of view, right? But we're still always going to be asking the same 6 questions. It's going to be around the who, the what, why, when, how, and the where, right? So these are the 6 W's. This is really our Kipling thing, 6 friends I have. The who, what, why, when, how, and where. And ironically, this looks like the same thing we're doing in plans. And that's what planning's all about, to understand these 6 different areas, right? How much comes from it, because it indirectly involves people and time frames, so therefore the how much wraps around that. But without that, we can't work that out in that respect either. So these are the 6 questions we need to ask. And models help us to understand where we are right now, the as is, right, and where we want to be at the end, right? The as is and where we want to be at the end of the project, right? Because now that allows us to fill this gap here and do some understanding and help to do the planning around it. And models help us to understand this too at this particular point from a solution point of view. Remember, we're talking about solution points of view here as well at the moment, right? So use models to help us do that, build through, touchy-feely, and then business can see the solution working or what parts of it working as you go through. So these are one part parts of model, right? Now, on the other side, we have business models for business analysis. Right? Still models, but we're going to use them in slightly different ways, right? Now, there are all sorts of different types of models. We're going to look at some of the high-level ones and the more popular ones at this moment in time. So the first one we need to look at, of course, is, or useful to use, is the business canvas. Business canvas, sometimes called, more often called the lean canvas. Lean, because it takes an empirical view of the business situation as it is at the moment. Looks at the high-level problems, the high-level solutions, what are the advantages we have, either specific from the solution or an unfair advantage we have from a point of view that's specific to our particular organisation or someone involved in the organisation. Because that helps us look at the customer we have, the channels we may need to have, therefore underneath all those, the costs, etc. So we look at the lean canvas aspects of it, right? There are other ways of doing this. Look at the domain models. We can look at the business domain model, right? Which tend to look a bit like swim lanes and stuff, right? Or process diagrams, which allows us to see how does the business work in this particular fashion and look at what we're doing right now, what we think we're doing right now. Because sometimes when we start to do these things, like we see in customer journey mapping, that look at what the customer has to do rather within the business itself. Right? Understand what we're doing right now or what we believe we're doing right now. Because sometimes that can bring out things that we're supposed to be doing and forgotten, which could be part of the problem or the situation that we have, or things we're doing that we don't need to do, which again goes back to the lean process, the Toyota approach, trying to be empirical about how we do things, be more smart, more efficient and more effective by making sure we don't duplicate work. But if we look at the flow diagram or swim lanes, we can look at either those two and relate to them differently because they show up the different sort of information that we have in there. Right. Now, the next one of the most popular ones, is the customer journey mapping. The customer journey. And what that does is, depending on the way you picture this, allows us to see each particular process as a ring round is the general viewpoint. We put this as a ring right here where we have the current process and we add the steps we go through to look at what we are doing in sequence. Because sometimes we might find we need to change sequences or we may need to find out how can we shorten them or improve the ones we have. And quite often that's the other point, is to improve certain aspects of the ones we have in place. Right? We can have impact mapping that looks at certain sequences and the impact that they have on certain parts of the business from a value point as well. And that helps us to understand if I make that change, what's the impact on some parts of the operations or indirect impact on operations or supply chains or areas or people themselves, depending on where we're doing the work. Right? Now, quite often, there are things that we don't always have in place to represent certain aspects of those particular areas. So we can create personas to represent a particular person or a group of people that will get impacted or can impact on us, both positively and negatively. Sometimes we always look at things positively and forget to look at the negative side of aspects, which will help us pick that information out. So we can track that too. And this is quite often used from use mappings as well. So we have these use cases which allow us to look at the different frameworks we have to go through, and then look at the people that get impacted by some of those frameworks, right? And that can help us. So sometimes we need to create personas in one or two of these areas because we don't have anyone specific, but it is an area that might get impacted either externally or internally. So we can't sort of say that's somebody particular or a group, especially if it's a customer area. We need to represent that. And also represent the negative side of things, because, you know, quite often we look at positive and forget, well, some areas have negatives too, you know, like side effects with drugs, obviously. Sometimes the disbenefits, like Prince calls them. So you have to look at those things as well. So use cases to look at the string of things. Often we have story mapping. And interestingly enough, story mapping goes back to when we're doing product breakdown, for instance, and starting to look at the different products we have underneath the major products we have, and therefore look at the requirements they have towards the project and start putting a story, you know, user story in place of them and mapping these stories together, because a bigger story has a smaller set of sequences of smaller ones to allow us to understand how that bigger picture builds up. So we have story mapping. Like I said, some of these we're going to address in more detail in other sessions. Right. Wireframes, we've discussed as well. Wireframes allow us to hang some of these together to look at layouts, to understand where the situation is right now, what we might need to change on them, usually around websites in particular. But sometimes you can use them to look at the story mappings and relationships with them, quite often looking at dependencies as well. But it helps us to see where the picture is right now, which is what we're trying to do, where are we right now, and where do we need to get to. And it's filling that gap in, which is the analysis part of it, and working with the teams to build the solution and the business to make sure that we get there. That's why in a lot of roles, a lot of projects, I beg your pardon, we have a role specifically called a business analyst who understands all that, because usually they come from the business environment. So understand what the business are, where they are right now, be able to analyze all that, understand what the vision is in place, and work with teams to see that the solution we have in place is going to help them address that. They're not there to design it in that respect, but help to understand the current and the future situations to help them fill the gaps and understand that in more detail. And one other one, not by I mean the last, in no particular order these, called rich pictures. Rich pictures is a bit like star mapping in many respects. Star mapping, where we look at the core area of the work we're in, and we start to build pictures from there to understand where all the linkages are between the certain different areas of an organization. For instance, if we change that, what business process might change, the accounting process, marketing, shipping, production, on all these things, and what impacts they'll have on those different areas, and people too, you know, personas, and help to build user cases. Quite often, rich pictures are usually very good to start with at the beginning, because it gives you a bigger picture of everything that's happening at the moment. Then you can start to refine those areas and take out certain sections, because now you can see a bigger picture and the linkage and dependencies or the interactions between certain areas. Okay, so not necessarily that tidy in some respects, but in a way, by mapping it as a star or some particular picture, you can then build some of these other areas from it. So these are just some of the different types of, there are about 13 or 14 different areas that, you know, generally recommended, or at least recognized, I should say, within the modeling world from a business analyst point of view, right? So we have these two different areas. Models from a solution point of view, build the model, understand how it looks. Some of these can be used up in that particular area, like wireframes and story mapping, for example. And at the same time, we have the business analysis side of things to understand where we are right now, the as is. Usually the business analysts will help to do a lot of that with the people who are coming from the user side of the business, the customer, and then work with the people who are going to build the solution for you to look at how we fill that gap from the who, what, why, when, how, and where, right? We're going to do that build so that we turn out and end up with a 2B, which hopefully will be the vision that was anticipated at the beginning and deliver the change, the beneficial change that the business wants. This is how we use models throughout projects.